Okay, this is Andy, Web 42, and we are talking about composing side effects today. Does anybody have any questions from yesterday or anything that they want to clear up from yesterday? I'm going to drop a thread. So we can take a couple minutes here at the beginning or at the end. Today's lesson, or today's guided project is we're going to be talking about the use effect hook in React. So hopefully everybody, I can't iterate this or stress this enough, iterate, like we iterate over maps. Haha, look at that, it's in my head. So I can't stress this enough to go through the warm-up material. Like the warm-up material is really good to get your kind of base of what's going on before you come into today, and we can talk about it. Also, remember how I said yesterday I was working on a list of some stuff. I've been working on that list of, so right now it's up to, oh, here, watch this. I can just kind of show you. I don't know how to share this yet. I got to figure out how to share this, but some stuff as far as like what I really like to look up and use. So here's a couple of YouTube videos that if you want, I can share these. I'm trying to like put them all in a doc, but I'll share them. So like this one right here was a really good one that he just talks about the spread operator. And then this one right here is the map, filter, and reduce function. So I learned this. If you look at these videos, they're like 5 years old, but he explains them super well. It's a guy, his YouTube channel is called Fun Function. And he talks about, this is where I learned map, filter, and reduce. Like he made it so relatable and understandable. That's where I learned it from. So I'll share those. And then a couple of YouTubers that I like to follow along and to learn from. I don't know if you've heard of Wes Boss, but Wes Boss is really good. Programming with Mosh, he's super great. And then this other one, UI to Dev. So this guy right here, I actually went to high school with him, and he was one of the reasons I ended up going to the boot camp I went to. And then his name's Tyler McGinnis. So he has a tylermcginnis.com, which is a bunch of React courses and JavaScript courses and stuff like that. But then he started UI to Dev, and I think he changed his Tyler McGinnis to that. I'm not 100% sure, but he posts a lot of good nuggets on there as far as some YouTube videos to understand this concept, that keyword this, to understand some state, some props, just different things. Like you can't learn enough, right? And then some really, if you're not necessarily bored because you got a lot to do, right? But if you kind of want to watch something that's entertaining but not that's still code related, there's this YouTube channel called I think it's called Honeypot. I have the playlist right here, but they talk about different languages. They're like 30-minute mini docs where they talk about like where Vue.js came from or where GraphQL came from. And they're really really well put together. They're kind of fun to watch. So I will do that. How about this? I'll try to copy and paste this in. So now I haven't watched some of these videos in a while. So if they're swearing, I do apologize, and I don't know. So I haven't gone through them as far as that goes, but I'll drop them in the help channel right now. Some good extra resources. So there you go. I just dropped those in the help channel. Don't watch them right now. Stay tuned for this one, but then watch them later. They're super helpful. All righty. So let's kind of talk about, oh wait, there was a question that popped up. So I saw it. Oh, there's three. Okay, let me read these. Difference between fetch and Axios get. So the Axios get is just a library we're using to handle all of these promises. You can totally use fetch. Just you have to do it a little bit differently, and it's native. So not a lot of differences. We just use Axios because it's really nicely or neatly put back together for us to handle the responses. The importance of the key. So you have to have the key every time you do a map in JavaScript using your components. Like if you're mapping over an array and spitting out a new component like we did yesterday, you have to use key. So that key, what it does is oh, here's another great one. Watch this. How many of you have gone to the React docs? Does anybody go to the React docs? The React docs are super, super awesome. So lists and keys. Here, I'll drop this one in the help us channel as well. Maybe. So with that, the key, what the key does, there we go. So that one's about lists and keys. So the React under the hood, you know how React is super fast. And so what React does is every time it has a component, it tries not to re-render the entire component. It only wants to render stuff that's changed. That's why it can be so fast. And so what it does is it tracks under the hood, it tracks every single component that we've created using these keys. And so that's why they have to be unique. Yeah. So then the next one, can you go over how to use keys properly? Okay, yeah. So to use keys properly, so when you, here, let's take a look at this real quick. So right here, this is that link I just dropped about React keys. So this is on React's actual docs right here. So when you're mapping over something and so that's a list. Let's go down to keys, right? Here we go, right here. So every time that you map over something, you have to add this key right here, right? So the key helps React identify which items have changed or added or are removed. Keys should be given the elements inside the array to give elements a stable identity. So usually what you do is you use an ID. So right here it says the best way to pick a key is to use a string that uniquely identifies a list item among its siblings. So that's why usually when you're going over, you're usually listing or looping over objects, and those objects usually have an ID. So that's safe to use those. And then remember when we did our strings, the hobby strings, and I said, all right, hopefully we're assuming that there can't be multiple hobbies of coding or multiple hobbies of, that same exact string. We made that assumption. What you can do if you don't have access to a unique ID is you can use the index. So I remember yesterday we kind of talked about how right here in one of my examples, when I was writing the callback function, I didn't wrap it in parentheses because with arrow syntax, you don't have to wrap it with parentheses if there's only one argument going through. But now if there's multiple, you do have to. So like down here on this one, what they're doing is they're pulling out an index. So every time you use the map, you have access to the index if you want it, or if you need to track something, or if you want to use it. And it's the second argument that goes through the callback function. And so then you can use that index to use it as a key. Now for like our purposes, as far as like spinning up little applications and trying to learn all of this, the index is totally fine and you can use it. But be aware that the ID or an ID, something unique, is really the way to use it. But you can, like, I wonder if yesterday you were running into a problem and you could have used the index instead to solve that key, and then that would go away. Now, in the real world, there will be cases potentially where you would use an index, but now you have that and So that should be I'm going to call that super helpful. All right, let's jump in and kind of read what we're going to be talking about today. Great questions, by the way. Thank you. So today we're going to talk about composing side effects. So explain what side effects are in React components. We're going to talk about how to sync side effects with state and props using the effect hook. We're going to fetch data from an API using the effect hook. And we're going to demonstrate how to clean up side effects in the effect hook and why you would need to do that. So, oops, look at that. This is still from yesterday. All right, so I'm inside of here and I'm going to do the git clone. So let's start this off. Except for I got to go into Slack. There we go. Copy this. So I'm in my directory, right? At the root of whatever directory I want to be in. I'm doing git clone. I just copied this from the big green button, clipboard, and enter. So that's cloning this down. And while this goes through, perfect. Now I need to make sure, remember, I cd into that directory. So that directory is called web guided projects components side effects. And I use tab. So tab will, when you start typing in, if you have multiple files in there with the same name, they or the same or directories, folders, it'll populate up to that point. And so then you have to type in a little bit more. And then I push tab again. It's a lot faster than trying to remember and type out that entire name with all those dashes and know where everything's at. Okay, so we're into here. I'm going to run code period to open this up into VS Code. By now, we've done this a ton, but you know, I don't know. I like to kind of go over it, just make sure everyone catches up. We know where we're at. Okay, cool. Now we're into here. Let's pop open our README. Let's take a look at this. So, because today is a little bit different. So today we're going to be using, parcel bundler. This runs on 1, 2, 3, 4. So if you notice in the package JSON, so we don't have the React scripts like we did yesterday in the module project. So in the module project, you're using a thing called create React app. And here we're using a thing called parser to bundle everything together, our parcel. So right here, you can see that this is our bundler. And then you can see the dependencies right here, our dev dependencies. We're using this parcel bundler. So inside of this package, we can see we're going to be using a bunch of stuff today. We're going to be using Axios for our requests to get some data. Now we've got a couple other ones we've never seen before, cores and express. So you're going to learn about those in unit 4. We'll kind of briefly go over what's going on today in our project. So don't get super hung up on these when we get up there and like when we're running our server. And then we see our prop types. We're not using those. And then we have React and React DOM and the UUID. Remember those unique identifiers? Same thing. It's creating a unique ID for different objects or whatever it's using that for. Well, we can see it. Okay, so if we jump back into our README, we read that, okay, it's going to be running on 1, 2, 3, 4, and then the API is going to be running on port 4000. And will not work if this port is being used by another process. You can use fkill to kill the process. All right, so we've cloned the repo, we've navigated into the folder. Now we need to run npmi. So I open up a new terminal inside of here, and I'm going to run npmi. So while that's going, we can continue reading and see, okay, so the next thing we're going to be doing is once that's done is we're going to run an npm run server and then an npm start. So if we run npm run server, we spin this up, we see that it's listening on port 4000. Now what we need to do is we need to spin up our next one, right? Our npm start. So this is a whole nother terminal, right? We're going to have 2 terminals going. You can do one of 2 things. You can either add and do a whole new terminal right here with your dropdown, which is great. Or you can do the split screen right here and run a new one right here. So I like to run them both side by side when they're connected and they're talking together. That way I can visually glance at them really quick and see, okay, one's working, one, they're both spinning or they're not, blah, blah, blah. So if we run npm start, push enter, we can see the parcel bundlers running. Server running at host 1, 2, 3, 4. It's still built, and we're good to go. So if we command click on this, we can see we have some code working. Now, you need to make sure that this is running on port 4000. Because if you open up your source over here on the left, open up the source directory. We're going to go to components. Wait, where's it at? Server, just kidding, I lied. Server.js on the bottom. So click on server.js. And this right here, we're just going to glance at this. Like I said, you're going to learn about this in unit 4, but I want you to be aware of kind of what's going on here. So what this is doing is this is just spinning up a server, a node server with using Express. And this is where we're getting our data back. So we have some friends, like we've seen this before. This is nothing new. This is all JavaScript, right? So this is just an array of objects. And then inside of here, we see some other stuff that we're not quite familiar with. We see an app.get with some weird stuff, an app.get and an app.listen. So this app comes in here from Express. So this is an Express application that's being ran. And then you can see that it's going to be ran on port 4000 or whatever available ports working. This will open up to whatever port if you have one running, or it'll run up port 4000. So just kind of be aware of what's going on in here, because this is where we're going to be getting our data from today. We're going to be making a local call to our own server. Look at that. My internet connection is unstable. That's not good. All right, let's keep going. So down here, we have both of them going. Now, if something wasn't working, or like something's amiss down here, you can add up another one. Oops, I want to go back here so we can see them both side by side. I can add a third one right here, and I can type in fkill. And if you have fkill installed, remember how we installed it, I think back in week 1, we can go through and we can kind of see all of the processes going on our computer right now. So I'm just using the arrows to scroll down. The blue is the highlighted one. So you can see I have a bunch of stuff up, and then I see a node right there. So what I can do is I came out of it. If I write fkill node, what that'll do is that will, actually, let's do this right. Get back into here. With this going, I can actually type in a process, so I can see how many nodes I have running right now, how many like Node.js is running. So I have 2 right here running. So we can see them both right here. We can see this is the one on port 4000, and this is the one on, oh, that's the one on port 4000. This is the one they're highlighted on 1, 2, 3, 4. I don't know. Is this too small? Is this hard to see? Are we okay?
No,
so, hey, someone can talk. Who jumped in first and has mic?
we all can talk, man.
What? Oh, well, cool. I'm gonna keep it on. If you can
Good
be adults
morning.
about it, then we're good. All right. So down here, what we can do is if we do Control C, we can actually type out fkill node. And now watch both the left and the right side. When I push enter, it shuts down both of those processes. So like if you have one running and you can't figure out where it is, you can type in fkill, it'll pull up all your lists, and you can search for node, and then you can just shut down those. Or if we needed to, we could have shut down just the port by running, like we could have typed in fkill port 4000, and then it would have ran just that one on the left. It would have just, but there's nothing there going, so it doesn't matter. Okay, so I'm going to delete this and get these running again. So I have npm run server going on this side and npm start running on this side. As soon as that's going, come back over here, refresh our page. I'm going to open up my tools, my dev tools, and we see no errors, and we see everything going on here. We're golden. Cool. Now let's go ahead and take a look back at the server.js and see what's kind of going on here. So when we used Axios, remember last week when we used Axios, we used HTTP to go out and try to find the data that's going to be returned. Like we could do a get, and it would give us a response, and we can kind of look at it and go through that. We're going to do kind of the same thing right now to understand where our endpoints are. So we have to, if we don't have someone on the backend team telling us what our endpoints are, we kind of have to dig around and look. So we jump in the server and we can see, okay, we have a get right here and a get right here. And each one of those is a path that we're going to be using. So we can see right here, we have a /friends and a /friends ID. So remember how we did those with Axios and HTTP? Same kind of thing. So what we can do is if we open up a new tab in our browser, while we have our server going, what we can do is we can type in localhost 4000. Ah, what? Localhost, but I don't want the rest of that, 4000. Okay, so we can type in localhost 4000 and we can hit this because this is our API right here, right? This is our port listening on, it tells us right here we're on port 4000. So we know we can use this endpoint to get data if it's returning data. So in our case, it's returning data. So in our browser, we can just straight do that, localhost 4000, and we can kind of play around with this. So we see that if we want to get all of this endpoint right here, this returns a bunch of friends, we have to hit this endpoint. So if I'm going to copy and paste it over here. So we're going to try to go to friends. If we hit enter, it's saying, please supply a valid API key. So it's yelling at us for an API key. So if we kind of come back over here into our server, we can see we have this right here. See that message right there? Please supply a valid API key. So it's saying, all right, if there's not an API key or that API key is not equal to this, that's what our API key is, then we can't use this. So in order to do an API key, what we need to do is we have to use our parameters, which is the question mark, right? We learned this last sprint. And then we can type in what the API key is. So API underscore key. And this is just an object, right? This is just a key value pair, whatever our object is. So API key equals, and then we knew it was XYZ because we looked over here. We saw this right here. Now, also, if we go into our constants file in our index, we can see what the API key was. It's XYZ. So please supply a valid API key. So now if we hit enter, we can see that we're getting into here and we're getting back an array of objects right here in the browser. We can use this. So if we come back to our server.js, we can see this right here. This right here, this array, this friends array has a bunch of stuff on it, right? It's an object or an array with a bunch of objects. But if we look over here, our API is only returning a couple things on there. It's returning an ID and a name. This is very common for us when we're developing if we're getting a whole bunch of data, like a collection of data, to not get everything, right? Because that could be really expensive and really hard for them to maintain. So that's why we have our second endpoint right here with a parameter of ID. So what we can do is if we come over here and we update our endpoint, so we have our friends / and then if we do an ID, whatever one of these we do, so say we do 3, we hit this, it returns a whole bunch of new data. We see the name, an email, an age, a hobby, and in those hobbies, it's an array of strings. Okay, I'm gonna drop a questions thread. There we go. Questions thread for everyone up to this point. So we're using this in Chrome to do all this. Now, if you have HTTP PI installed on your computer, you can do it inside of your terminal. So you can run HTTP get where you remember we're at localhost 4000 and we want to go to friends. But now what's kind of wonky on the terminal is you have to do an escape of, well, I didn't press enter. So it's giving us the message right there. Please supply a valid API key. Because up in my HTTP, I didn't do one. Okay, there's our backslash to escape it. And then we can do our API key. So friends API underscore key equals XYZ. So if we enter, now all of a sudden we're getting the same stuff back. And I'm just using it inside of here. We see that we have our headers, different things in here. We can see like the connection, the date. We can see what our response is. So it's an array of objects. That was the same objects that we were getting up here if we got rid of this 3. Same thing. Cool. I'm going to take a look at these questions. What does the question mark represent? The question mark is, wait, what? The one that you guys, so the question mark is parameters. So anytime that you are posting up here, it represents an object up in the URL so that then you can drive your data differently. I will send out some more information, the same kind of stuff we had from last week. I can send out, it kind of explains more about that, but that's all that is it's just a key value pair up there that you can drive your application all based on your URL. And now the guided project that we cloned has all been completed. That's not good. I don't. Yeah. What in the world? Someone must have updated that with the code. That's odd. Or did I grab the wrong one? Hold on. Pause for 2 seconds. Let me go to this guided projects. Composing side effects. Oh yeah, someone. MHM, whoever that is, put everything in. Huh. I don't know who. Oh man. Well, cool. Everyone, we're just gonna walk through the code. So someone finished it and merged the solution branch into this branch. That's okay. We'll go through and we'll just comment everything out and we'll go through it. Let's take our first break though. It's 10:30. So let's take our first 5-minute break. And then when we get back, we'll keep going and talk about it. Okay, so 5 minutes starting now. All right, and we're back. So let's go ahead and look at that. Everything's working. Let's go ahead. We're going to delete a bunch of stuff and then we're going to make it not work. And then we're going to do it all again. We're not going to comment it out. We're just going to delete it so we can fix it. Okay. So I should have done that while we were going through that. This is all fine. We're going to delete this. So that breaks. This should all be fine. That should all be fine. We're going to delete this. So we can know how to do that. We're going to delete this. So we know how to do that. We're going to delete this. So we know how to do that. We're going to save this. Then we're going to go into the details. That's already done. We're going to delete task 4. We're going to delete task 5. And we're going to delete task 6. And we're going to delete task 7. Doesn't exist. Oh, it's right there. So we're going to delete all of this. I'm going to save this. Come over here and we don't see any friends. Yeah, that's right. That's fine. Okay, cool. I want everyone, we're going to wait for this to push. It should have just pushed. Let me come over here, refresh this. Make sure that the lecture branch is empty. And I want everyone to run that command. Okay, so I'll type the command in just 1 second. I'm just double checking, making sure it's all empty. Yep. Okay, so everyone run the magic command and we'll start at square one together. So everyone go through and run, where is the Slack channel? There it is. Okay, web 42. What, you guys can't see me? You missed my face? Everyone can't see me? There I am. Sorry. All right. See, okay, then maybe do look at the camera. It makes it a little more personable, right? Cool. So everyone needs to run this command right now. Let me post it. So everyone go run that command and then everyone will jump up to where I'm at. And then we can work through this together. And if you don't do this command, then you're going to know all the answers. You're going to seem super smart. Or you might hinder yourself a little bit and not know how to go through everything because you're going to get all that code at the end anyways. All right, so everyone go through, run that command. When we get that command ran, I want a thumbs up, just like we've had 3 people do. I got to have at least like 10. That'll be, what is that, 20%? 7, 8, 9, 10, 13. Okay, that's good. Thank you, everyone. All right, let's get going on what we're going to actually be doing. If you read through the code, you're going to have an idea of how to do everything. So now I expect some great answers. All right, so the first thing we need to do is kind of come in here and familiarize ourselves with what's going on. So let's open up our design files. And inside of here, we can see the project we're going to be doing. So for right now, I'm going to just move my terminal way down so it can make this bigger. Now, what we see over here on the left is our app that we're going to be building. We see that it's got my friends. It's got a bunch of names. We saw this earlier. And then it's got some buttons that maybe if we click, it's going to show this details box, right? And so inside of this details box, we see a bunch of other stuff. We see Amber is age or 32. We see an email, we see likes, and we see a close button. And then if we look over on the right-hand side, we see our inspector, the React components that we've been using, our React Dev Tools. And we can see inside of here, we have 2 components. We have our app component, and then it has a child component of details. Right now, it looks like we're highlighted on so if you kind of zoom in, you can see we're highlighted on the app, and then up here it says app. So we're looking at the the app component. So inside of here, we see that we have some sort of state, right? With one of them is an array of a bunch of objects, and what those objects look like. That looks very similar to the data that we were getting back with our friends API endpoint without the ID. And then we have another state of a number. Not 100% sure what that number is, but we have a number. So I'm sure we're gonna figure this out. Ooh, oh, okay. Zooming in and out with the trackpad is very janky. Now let's go through, and now that I've deleted everything, and hopefully all of you have deleted everything, I'm gonna set a 1-minute timer, and I want you to kind of just skim through app.js and details.js. So that way you can kind of get familiar with it. So I'm going to set a 1-minute timer, and I want you to do that. So 1-minute timer, start. And then as you're going through, I want you to, if you see anything a little different that you're not quite sure of what it is, let's talk about it, because there's a few things in here that I want to talk about. So let's see. So questions. Yours should look like mine without completed code. I mean, there's a lot of boilerplate code in there, so we don't have to build everything out, but you shouldn't see any Axios stuff, or you shouldn't see any use effects yet. Okay, perfect. 1 minute's up. Good work. See a couple questions. Do we need to npm I and all that again? No, you shouldn't need to. It's just pulling down. We didn't change any of the package JSON, so you should be fine. Just npm run server and npm start. You'll be fine. All right. So if we kind of just skim through this, I'm gonna skim through it really quick. So we've got our imports up here. We see task 1. We're going to be importing Axios, so we're going to have to do that. Another thing we're going to need to do is import consts. So we can go over here and look at that file real quick. Okay, so this is cool. This is building upon yesterday, right? Yesterday we learned about named and default exports. So in this file right here, we don't have any default exports, right? We only have named exports, and we have 2 of them. So this is a great example of what you would do to use named imports. So in our case, we're going to end up using these, right, and pull them in. We're going to figure out how we're going to end up using them. But what this will allow you to do is, say your base URL is like http://www.applesauce and bananas equals jump upside down and around the bank /friends/applesauce/oranges. Can you imagine writing that every single time? So setting it to a variable makes it super easy. And so we'll end up importing this and using that. All right, and then let's jump back into app.js. We see that we've got some state right here. Remember, we saw those, and now we can see what they are. Okay, one of them is friends, and the other one is an ID. Okay, cool. So that number is just an ID. And then we see some more stuff. We see a couple functions. We call these helper functions. So they do something useful for us. We're setting the current friend ID with when we click on open details, and we're closing the details. We're also calling that state changer, or that callback function. We're just driving our application based on that. Cool. Task 3, make an effect. Oh, okay, so this is going to be our first thing that we're going to be doing. We're going to be using our use effect. We're going to learn about that. Then if we come down here, we see a little bit more. We see this is interesting. We're declaring a component, a React component inside of our app component, right? We haven't really done this before, where all this is this is just a function that takes in some data and spits out some UI, right? So we're writing we're building our friend component right inside of here in this app.js, which works great. And then we're invoking it down here. You can see down here, we're invoking it. There it is, our key, right? We're mapping over something. There's our key. And then down here, we see something that might be a little bit different. We see a current friend ID and %, and then something else. It looks like it's just a component, a details component with a couple props being passed in. Who knows what this ampersand is? Does anybody? It's kind of funny. I was like, oh, ask that question. All right, who's gonna raise their hand? And then I'm gonna call on you and you're gonna answer it, right? So the ampersand, if you know what that is, drop it in the questions. Yeah, let's do that. That'll work. Yep, it's an operator. It's the and operator. So yep, and equals and, perfect. So what does it do? How does that work? Do we know how that works? Ah, yeah, right there. It's a truthy operator. Yep. So anything to the left, in our case right here in React, this is conditional rendering. So anything to the left of this and, if it's truthy, then it will do whatever is to the right of it. So it will render out this details component. If it's falsy, it does not render anything to the right of us. So we can see this in action right now. So over here we have some of my friends, and then we have, nothing, right? If we open up our React Dev Tools, we open up our app, we see that we're not rendering out anything but an app component. See, this is a details component inside. See this right here on our left, our tree. We have another details component. This is a details component. We're not rendering that because this is falsy. Now, if we just hard coded this in, say, let's just hard code this in to say 1, we save this. Now, all of a sudden, current friend ID is truthy. So we should see this when we come over here. So if we come over here, now we see a details component, right? So this is truthy now. So now we're showing this. And then we can see down here in our React Dev Tools, we see that it's showing up. We're going to end up going through and updating some of this to look at our mockups, our design files, but we can kind of see how that and percent works. So let's come back up here and reset this to null and keep going. Okay, so the first thing we need to do is we need to import Axios from node modules. So let's do that on line 3. So let's do task 1 on line 3. That'll be our first thread. Task 1. I'm going to, while you're doing that, I'm going to drop the whatever attendance code again in the chat in case anybody missed it. Task 1, line 3. Import Axios from Axios. All right, so let's do this. Import Axios from Axios. So we need to remember that when we're doing the from side, then these node modules, they just need to be in a string. And then whatever we name it right here, since this is the default import, we need to make sure we're using this everywhere. So right here, we're importing it Axios like this. We need to use that. Okay, the next thing we need to do is we need to import the constants from the constants file, right? We're going to import those two things. We're going to import, what are they? Base URL and something else, API key. So we're going to import these. These are named imports. So we need to make sure we do this the named import way. So let's do task 2. Now, I want you to be aware of something. When you're doing the default import, you're importing whatever the default is. You have control of kind of what this says, what this is, but it's best practice to kind of match what you're using. So in this case, if you would have done like apples, you would just have to do apples.get, which totally doesn't make sense and is terrible. Don't do that, but you have control of that name. We're going to learn in yup validation next time you'll see that we're going to import a library called YUP. It's called YUP. We import it usually lowercase, but a lot of times when you're reading like Stack Overflow and stuff like that, you'll see it go back and forth between all lowercase or all uppercase. But then they're both from the same package. And the from side is the exact same, but the names are kind of different. But then you just have to be aware that's how you have to call it and use it everywhere. Okay, so we had anyone task 2. We got some thumbs up. Should we try this? So if we pass these in, let's go ahead and take a look at this. So we're importing using the named imports, right? Because we're using the named imports, we have to use the curly braces. We know that we're doing named imports because if we go to the constant file, we see that there's no default. There's no word default here anywhere. They're just export const and then a parameter name or a variable name and then what it is, right? So we know that we have to use the named imports. Now we're getting these from a file. So how we know that this is the correct file is right here. We live in app.js. We need to go up a directory into the source directory and then down inside of the constants directory and grab the index. So in order to go up a directory, we have to do the .. That puts us up in the source. And then we want to go inside of constants. So now the first word constants, we're inside of this directory, but now we need to point to the right file. So that's why we have the index after that. Cool. So now we've imported Axios and we've grabbed our base URL and API key so we can reuse these as string interpolation as variables throughout the application that we're going to be building. All right, let's keep going. So we've done task 1 and 2. Now we're going to do task 3. So task 3 is going to be the whole thing. What we're going to be talking about today is the use effect hook. So after this lecture, I totally recommend you kind of reading React docs. Go read their use hook or use effect, the use hook, because it's super helpful. You can't learn enough from like the docs. The docs are like usually the best place to learn stuff. But like all of these things, after I explain it, what's going on, after you read it, it'll all start, making more sense and working back together. Okay, so the first thing we need to do in order to use effect is in order to use it, it's just like our use state hook. That's how we import it. So up here, it's a named import. So on line 1, we do use effect. We do comma use effect. In the Zach inside of the def or inside of our constants. So over here in our constants, since there's no default, that's okay. Like we just remember with exports, there can only be one export per file and there can be as many named exports per file. So what this, in our case, when we're importing these, we're just importing the named, we have the named versions because there's no default. We're just importing these named exports. And all these exports is a key and a value, right? This is just a variable and its value. That's all it is. All righty. So we've imported the use hook, use effect hook from React. And now we want to do something with it. So what the use effect hook does is it allows us to do any side effects. So it allows us to run any side effects, meaning we can hit an API endpoint and get data back from an API. Or we can do like timers and stuff like that. And then also we can do like manual manipulation of the DOM. And so the use effects hook is for all of those side effects. Those are called side effects, or they're called effects. We'll end up using it. You're going to end up learning. So this is the new way of React doing it. And in unit 3, you're going to learn about lifecycle hooks. You're going to learn about component did mount, component did unmount, component will mount, and component will unmount, component should mount, all of these different things. Those are all wrapped up into this use hook. or use effect hook, which are super fantastic, easy to use. So yes, last week we had to import Axios, but this week, right now in this one, if we go to our package JSON, we can see that it's already inside of our dependencies. And so we don't have to npm install Axios. You may have to do that in your project this afternoon. I'm not 100% sure. You'll have to look at your package JSON and see if it's already there. If it's already in there, when you run npmi, it works. If it's not listed in the dependencies, then you do have to run npmi Axios. And what that'll do is it'll put it inside of our dependencies object right here. So then when you run npmi, it knows to install that. Okay, back over here to the app.js. So now to use these, what we need to know about them is to use a use effect, it's a function. So what we have to do is we have to do use effect, and then we need to invoke it. So you remember how we did use state up here? We had to invoke it. Same kind of idea down here. Only we're not setting, you don't set these to variable names. These are just, you put these out here in between where you're opening up your component and before you're returning your statement. So they need to live up here. So now the next thing you need to know after knowing that we need to invoke this is it needs a callback function and then one other parameter. So let's set that up now. So if we set this up, we're just going to set up the body like this. And then it needs one other thing. That other thing is called a dependency array. So this dependency array, we're not going to really use right now, but it is needed in order to not cause an infinite loop or a rerun or re-render of everything. So when it's just an empty array, it's telling React to only run this function, whatever's inside of here, this callback function, one time when the component mounts. So it only runs one time with that empty array. If you don't have that empty array, it'll run all the time. Every time something happens, it'll run. And so that will cause you so many headaches. So the best thing to do is just to set up your use effect like this. Every time you're going to write one, just set it up like this. Use effect, invoke it, then put your callback function in, comma, empty array. That's the first thing we do when we're going to do this. Now, inside of here, this is where we do whatever we need to do. So in our case, we need to do an API call, right? An axios.get. So anytime we need to do some sort of side effect, it goes inside of this use effect hook. So now we're going to write this just like we've written an Axios get before. So I'm going to put this right here in the thread. So we should know how to do an Axios get, right? We learned this last week. So I don't know how the best way to write this. So what is the code that I should write? What's the code to get the Axios request, to make the Axios request? What's the code to make the Axios request? Does that make sense? So we need to do whatever we need to do inside of our Axios call right here. So like axios.get, and then we need to pass in a URL. So we've done this, and let's see. Yeah, perfect. Okay, so great. So let's do that. Our axios.get. Perfect. It's a method or a function, so we need to invoke it. Perfect. But then we need to remember that it's a promise. So we need to do our .then and our .catch. So we just need to set those up, right? We can come back in and fill them in. So then in our .catch, we know that we're going to get an error. And for now, let's just log out our error. Okay. And then our next one, let's go up to our .then. Our .then is going to give us a response. So let's take that response. I'm going to just call it res, short for response. And then inside of here, I just want to log out that res or that response. Okay, so now we've got our promises taken care of, but now we need to update our get. So we need a URL. So whoever, everyone's saying URL right there. Perfect. So now we know we need to do some sort of URL right here. So now we need to remember what our URL is. So in order to do that, we go back over to our server and remember our endpoints. These are our endpoints. We need those, right? So we're going to try to just get all of the friends right now. We're not going to worry about this ID one. So if we come back into here, what we want to do is we're going to use our base URL, our const that let's see if we hover over it right there. See, it's HTTP localhost. And then we're going to need our endpoint from that server. So someone oh yeah, someone dropped it right there. So we're going to use backticks because we're going to use some JavaScript stuff. We want to use our variable, our base URL. So we push the right buttons. So we'll do our $ curly braces so that way we can use a variable. So this one is going to be base URL. Perfect. And then the next thing we need to do is we need to do where we're going. So we're going to go to friends, right? So if we come back over here and we push friends, if we save this, we come over here, go into our console. Oh, look at that. We're getting an error. Uh-oh, we're getting an error. Does anybody know why we're getting an error? Oh, look, I guess, Ryan, you already answered my question. Right, we need to set this up the way we had it before. So we need our API key, right? So then we do our question mark to set up our parameters. And then we're going to do our API key is equal. And then we're going to do our JavaScript interpolation again. So our API key. So now if we save this, come over here, we're getting back a response. We see our console log. And that's just the whole response of our object, right? So we're seeing this whole entire object back. And we can see on here, we've got this config key with the value, and it's got some stuff inside of it. It looks like it's an object. We have data, we have headers, we have requests, status text. So all of this is, we're getting back an object. It's returning our response as an object. And then if we open up our data, we see the stuff that we need. Okay, so we need the data. So let's do console log res dot, because it's an object, dot data. We'll save this, come over here, and now we're getting an array. Cool, we have an array of objects. It's only getting called once because of our dependence array. We're going to play with this here in a second so we can kind of understand that a little bit better. Okay, so now that we've done this and we've got our response back, another thing we could have done to look at these, and I saw someone else put it up here, is a debugger. Does everybody use, or does anybody use debugger? So what the debugger will do, as long as your inspector is open, it'll fire. If your inspector is not open, this won't fire. But what this does is it fires off right here at the debugger point, wherever you've written that line debugger, that actual word. And then what we can do is we can actually look and see kind of what's going on. So if we hover over different variables, we can see what it is. So right here, if we hover over base URL, we see that this base URL represents this actual string. So this is actually http://localhost:/4000. And then we see /friends, parameter API key. And if we hover there, we can see the actual API key. And then inside of here, we can see we have our response. That's what our response comes back as. And then we can hover over this part right here. We can actually see what's going on. Also, on the right-hand side, you can see we have our scope. And inside of our scope, we are getting back our response. And we can open that up and look through and see all of the data that we're working with. And it's important to know what the data is to either console log it or to either debug it. So that we know what data is coming back and how we can use it and how we're going to end up using it and passing it around. Okay, so I'm going to push play on this. I'm going to come over here, to our app.js, and I'm going to get rid of this debugger. And we're going to finish up. So now we have our use effect on success, right here on line 24, on success, set the array of friend objects from the API into state. Okay, so how do we do that? How do we set this friends array right here. How do we update that with our array of data? You know, if we come over here, we see our console, this right here. There's our array of data. How do we do that? On line 30. Okay, I'm going to do a thread. Line 30, update state with response. Yep. Okay, so we're going to use our use state hook right here. This is our callback function, and we're going to update it right there. So perfect. So we do set friends, if I could type, and then we're going to pass in the data that we actually want, which is that array, right? Because this is expecting an array. So if we save this, come over here, and then all of a sudden we see it's working because it's already down here. We're already mapping over our friends array and then spitting it out. Cool. So I'm going to move this over a little bit so you can see this timer. We're going to take a 5-minute break. I'm going to drop a questions thread, and then we're going to come back and we're going to talk about a couple more things. Great work. So the timer's going. You can see it. I'll move that a little bit more. There you go. And talk to you in a minute. All right, and we're back. So I want to test this theory. So it's been 45 seconds since the last time you tried to pull, unless you tried to pull sometime in between that 45 seconds. I want you to try to run the magic script again and see if it works, because I want to see it if it really is. Let's just test that theory out that I have to switch over to that terminal, which does not make sense at all in my head. So someone try running it. Let's see if it works. Still okay, so it still doesn't work, really. All right. Now I'm gonna come over here. I'm switching to that one. Okay, I've switched to it. Now try it. And if it works, that is really janky. Huh, so it doesn't reset you to where I'm at right here. All right, well, I gotta figure out what's going on. Let's go ahead and let me push save. Right here, let's see if this will update. So let's get a push going, right? So we'll just do a comment right here. This is where our effect is. Save this. So we save it, and then that'll push in about 45 seconds. It'll run an automatic push. And then it should work. All right, so let's get going back into this. I wanted to point something out real quick. Build error, what? All right, give it a second, pull it again, and then let's see if it all fixes out. Right here, I wanted to show you something. So this is something you could probably run into, or this is something you need to know about React. So right here, we're doing this and operator right here, this truthy operator, to do some conditional rendering. So if this doesn't exist, don't render this, or if this does exist, render this. So up here, friends.map is happening. So we know a .map has to work on an array. So if we come over here, I'm going to move this. In our console, we don't see any errors or anything like that. If I comment out this use effect, our friends go away, right? And our comment goes away, our console, because we're not using it. But this is still not erroring out or anything, right? Because the map is expecting to iterate over an array. Well, we've initialized friends to be an empty array. Now, if we would have done this, null, watch what happens. We save this, and our application breaks, and we're running into an error. So we're coming over here and we're reading this. And this is an error you're going to see a lot as you're developing. You're going to say, it says cannot read property map of null, or cannot read property map of undefined is usually the one you're going to run into. That right there is telling you this is very explicit of what's happening. So it's saying that it's trying to use the map array method on null, which doesn't exist, right? You can't map over null. You have to map over an array. Or it would probably say map of undefined. If it's undefined, that means it doesn't exist. It's not an array. So we need to fix that. And then it tells us where it's at, JS line 52. So if we come over here to app.js, go down to line 52, we can see right there, this is the problem of our error. So we can see, okay, so friends.map. Okay, so why is this not working? Oh, okay, so it's null. So there's two ways we can fix this. One, we can fix this by instantiating this with an empty array, like we did. So now that's an array, and it's trying to loop over, but there's nothing inside of that array. So for nothing inside of that array, we're not doing anything, but it doesn't break, right? It doesn't get mad at us. The other way we could fix this is we could do what we're doing down here. We could do a friends and friends, right? So the same thing, conditional rendering. All that's looking for is to see if this is a truthy value. null is a falsy value, so this wouldn't work. So this saves our error from happening. And then if we run our Axios use effect, right? Uncomment that out. We see that we don't run into any errors. Now notice, we're going to get rid of this catch. If we push save, we're running into this error again. But we're like, hey, what's going on? I have my use effect. It's working right here. Like I'm setting my friends to that response. But if you read this, it's saying map of null. So what that's telling us is it's reading this value first. So when the first time the component runs, it comes in here and it says, okay, so friends is null. And it comes down here and it tries to run through all of this. Friends dot null. I can't map over null dot map. That doesn't work. But you're like, oh, but I've done this. But we have to remember with our side effects is we don't know when this call is going to come back. Like it's the matter of micro milliseconds or whatever when it comes back in our case, but it doesn't come back fast enough for the first render. So you have to be aware of those and know how to handle those. So if we put our empty array there, everything works. So be aware of that because those are some gotchas that can happen. And then those, like I said, the React error messages are super helpful. And that'll let you start backtracing where you need to go. Okay, so cool. A little bit of a recap. What we've done in this file so far. We've imported the use effect. We've imported Axios so we could make our calls. We've imported our constants, our base URL and API key. We've used that Axios inside of a use effect. Now we have our use effect here, which allows us to do side effects like an API call. We're doing stuff inside of this, right? This is where we do all of our data. We do it inside of here. So we do our axios.get, and then we're just using string interpolation to build out our entire URL. So this is just a string interpolated using variables to build our URL. And then Axios returns promises. So we set up our .then and our .catch. And once we get our data back, we use our data immediately, or we do something with our data inside of that .then, inside of that promise. So this is where we use our data. So we're just calling our use state hook right here, our callback function to update our friends and setting that data there. And then we had our second argument inside of here. Remember, if we have our use effect, not use debug value, use effect. If we set it up, we have our arrow function, it's our body, and then our second parameter. So that second argument that we're passing through is the dependency array. And so when it's empty, it's telling React just to run this one-time unload, one time when it mounts. All right. Now let's jump into the details, JS, and keep going. All right, did that ever work? Did it ever work? Are we up to date? Are we working? Do we have build errors? Are we good? And I didn't see anybody post any questions. So, Murray just said it's working. See, that's janky. I don't know what's going on. All right. So let's jump into the details and get going. I'm going to bring this down a lot more so that way we can see what's going on a little bit better. We have this over here on our right-hand side and then our code. So we already have imported our use state and use effect hook. I keep getting this build error. What? Build our canary property type of undefined. Are you running your server? So do you have both the server? So shut them both down and then spin up your server and then spin up your npm start. Try that. Someone else said something. Oh, there you go. Try what Ryder said to do too. Okay. What we have over here, we see that this stuff is already put in. And then we have our details component. right? So we are exporting our details component. We have a couple things in here. We have our props. We're seeing props being passed in. So if we look over here, we see those details. We have a friend ID and a close. So we can save this file. If we come over here right now, like we can click through all of this and they work, right? And what it's doing is it's using our helper function. When we click on open details, there's our open details button. It passes an ID through, and then that ID comes through and it updates it. Updates that current friend ID, and that current friend ID is what's being passed around as props. So we can see that that's all working. We can see the close button works. Same thing, close is a function that's being passed in as props. So what happens when it gets invoked, doesn't have any, it's not being invoked with any arguments. It's just setting our current friend ID to null. So when it's null, remember it's falsy, and then we're no longer rendering this details component. Okay, inside of our details component, we open this up and we see some more stuff. Let's come down here to the bottom. So if we click on one of these, we can see it on the right and kind of look at it on the left. We see we have this details of friend with ID and friend ID. And then we see a bunch of other stuff. We see a bunch of markup, but we don't see any actual stuff. That's because this details is falsy. And we know that because we're not rendering it with our conditional rendering, our and%. So if we come up here, we can see right by default, our initial value is null of those details. And then if we come down here again, we can see that the details is rendering a friend ID. Let's see, well, where's this friend ID coming from? Because we can see it right here, right? That was being passed in as props. So that right there is being passed in as a prop. And then that's how we know that this is working. And see that this is outside of this conditional rendering. Hey, remember those blank tags that I told you about right there? There they are. This is one of those examples where what this will do is, if this is truthy, it renders out whatever's inside of these parentheses, right? Our piece of UI. And so when it renders with those empty tags, because everything has to have a wrapper, it'll be H2 div H2 paragraph. There won't be some extra janky HTML element going on in there. Okay, so let's work on task 4. So we're going to create a side effect that what is the close on line 6? So close is that other prop. Okay, so if we go over here to our app, so we know that this is a prop coming in, because see how it's equal to props. So it's a prop coming in. If we jump up, we can see what it is. There it is, and it's just that close details when it gets invoked. So then over here, we have that button, on click, they're just firing off that whole function. Why do empty wrappers instead of just a div? Is that like correct? Yep. So it helps out with styling. It doesn't nest an extra bunch of UI or a bunch of elements down. It flattens it out. So when we actually look at it, when we get details, we'll look at it and we can see in the elements, like right now, it's not being rendered, but inside of here, we would be able to see, oh, here's the container. So we have that H2, but then there's nothing else, right? Because it's not being rendered. Instead, we would, if we had a div, it would be H2 and then a div and then a bunch of stuff. Otherwise, the way it is right now, what it'll be is H2 paragraph below this. We'll see it in just a second when we get to that. Okay, so let's do this. So create a side effect that runs only after the first render. So let's do this. If we remember, we do our use effect and let's just set it up. So we invoke it, set up our callback function, and then we do our parentheses, right? This is the first, only after the first render. That's why we have our dependency, right? I'm going to comment out this console over here. I'll probably just delete it. That way we clear up our console. Okay. So we created this use effect. Now inside of here, let's do something, right? Let's console log a message. Add a listener. That's not what this one's doing. This one's just doing a side effect on first render. So if we save this, we come over here, we're not going to see it in our console yet because we haven't even clicked on this component. This component is not even rendering yet, right? In order to render this component, we had to click on one of these buttons. We click on one of these buttons and all of a sudden we see our side effect on first render. Cool. So now that we've done that, what we can do is we can create a cleanup. So now sometimes when we're writing these side effects and we're doing something, we need to do what's called a cleanup, or after the component unmounts and goes away, we need to do something to take care of some sort of code. For example, if you're creating an application that if you click on one of these, what it does is it maybe logs in to see your tweets, you know, and it shows you the number of followers you have or something like that. So we would hit an API, get that back, get that response back. But then when we close this, we don't care about that data anymore. We don't want to be subscribed to that anymore. So we would run a cleanup to then say log out of whatever that, say, Twitter handle is or whatever. Okay, so to do that, you have to do a function. You have to return a function. So you do a return and then you just do an arrow function. And this is a cleanup right here. So in this cleanup, in this case, let's just log cleanup right before unmount. So if we save this, nothing, we don't see anything. If we click on our button, it comes in here, we see our side effect on first render, right? So that's when this happened, but we don't see anything else, right? So now if we push close, that function is called, and then it does whatever it needs to do. So I did this just in line, but right, this is the same, like don't get confused. This would be the same as doing, you know, whatever we needed to do inside of here like that. I just put it on one line. Cool. Okay, so now let's move on to task 5. So we're going to create a side effect that runs only after the first render and puts a click event on the document, but then see what happens if we don't clean up. Okay, so let's go ahead and do this. So let's talk about that here in a second, Ryder. So let's see if I understand your question correctly. Let's do this one and then let's talk about that. So on line task 5, do we want to try it? Here, I'm going to put a thread over here. So for task 5, so I want you to try it. So task 5, what we need to do is we need to create a side effect that only runs after the first render. So we know that it's going to have that empty dependency array. So let's at least set that up. How do we set up that use effect? Go ahead and do that. Set up your use effect. You don't necessarily have to put anything inside of it yet, but I want to see how you would set it up. Yep, perfect, Ryder. Good. Let's just set it up just like that. So we have our use effect. Great. Andrew, yep. Devin, yeah, you're going extra. Perfect. Okay, so we invoke our use effect method, and then inside of there we pass our callback function. And then we do, since we want this is just always, it's easier just to remember to always put your empty dependency array in. So now this we know will run after the first time and only one time. Okay, so then inside of here, this is where we want to do more stuff, right? So now we want to add a click event on the document. So let's do this first. Let's build out our click event. So let's build out our listener. So let's do const click listener equals a function, And now let's do something inside here. Let's just log out. Here's a random. Oh, I want to do this in string interpolation. Okay, so then I can do some JavaScripty stuff. So math dot random. Right. Okay, so all we've done is created a function, just a click listener. And all it does is every time every time this function is called, it's going to just console log a random number. So now we need to add it, just like what Devin did. We need to do document dot add event listener, that, and we're going to add a click event, and then we're going to pass it what it is. It's our click listener. So if we save this, come over here, if we click around the document, nothing happens, right? Because we're not inside of this details yet. We haven't done anything. If we click see details, all of a sudden our first render happens, which is this one up here. And then we register this. So now this is registered. So now if we click again, we see here's a random number. So we click all over the place. Now watch what happens. If we push close, we cleaned up, and I don't know if you noticed, but that one went off. And if we keep clicking, it's still there, right? This is always going to be on here because we didn't clean up. So in order to clean up, what we would need to do is return a function. And then inside of this function, we want to do something. So we want to do not document fragment, document dot remove event listener, and then what it is. It's the click, and we want to remove which one it is, click listener. So now if we save this, we come back over here, we don't see anything, we click, we see our first one up here, right there, side effect. Now, if we start clicking around, we see our click listener is going on. If we push close and we keep clicking around, we cleaned up that, we got rid of that. So that's where this becomes super useful. All right, now we're going to take our final break, and then we're going to come back and wrap this up. We have 2 tasks left, and then we're going to end. So thank you, everybody. Take your last 5-minute break. This isn't the end yet. We've got another few more minutes, but last 5-minute break. I'm gonna drop a questions tab, and then we'll get back. Start. Cool. All right. Let's wrap up the last little bit. What in the world? What is going on with this magic code? Let's see, 11:41 is when it pushed. Interesting. Let me save again here and we'll try it again here in a second. Okay, so what is the point of cleaning up? So the point of cleaning up is in case we needed, like in this case, we have this click handler, right? This click event. If we would add it, and so we wanted to track something like say we wanted to track all the clicks and when this details component is viewable, what we would do is when it's open, now we can go through and we can click everything, right? But we don't want to, once it's done, we want to close this. We don't care about the clicks anymore. And so we need to clean that up. What really, oh yeah, okay, right. I reread your question. It makes more sense. So what triggers the return? So it's actually the component did unmount, or the component will unmount lifecycle hook in React. So what happens is there's a couple things under the hood. When a component's mounting, React does some stuff. They're called life cycles. When a component is in there and it should update, that's another life cycle. When a component will unmount, or it's just about to, to go away, it's called unmount. Then it fires this return, and that's when that cleanup gets fired. Is on the unmount. All right, so task 6. Let's do this one. So what we're going to do is I'm going to comment out this one for now, and I'm going to comment out this one so we don't have any crazy consoles. You won't be, so if you don't unmount that component, then yes, you wouldn't ever fire off that return. So unmount would also mean, like, so say you're here. We're going to learn about this with React React router next week when we go onto a router. Say you have a home page and an about page, right? On the home page, we're rendering a component. So when we go to that component, we're seeing we do the on mount, which fires off this, if we're using a use effect, fires off this first one. But then when we go over to the about page, the home page unmounts, like we don't see it anymore, right? Unless you're still showing it. Most of the time you only want to show what the about page is, right? So that's an unmount as well. And so you would fire off that return. So it's not necessarily close per se, but in our case where we have a close because we're showing a new component and then we're closing that component. But if we navigate it away and just show a different component, that's when that unmount happens, or that return happens, which is fires that unmount. Okay, so down here, if we create a side effect without that dependencies array, we can kind of see what happens here. So if we do our use effect, we set it up. Now we're going against what we said. We're not adding our dependency array, which would have been this, right? We're not having this. We're going to back this up. So inside of here, if we just log effect after DOM, let's say every DOM surgery, and then if we do our return, right? So we'll do this one. Inside of here, we'll do the same thing. So we'll log out, cleanup, save this. If we come over here, we open this up, we see every time we go through, it's always firing these off. And so every time we re-render, it's going to happen. In this case, it's kind of janky to see, but just be aware of that. Okay, so let's get rid of this one. And now let's do our final piece that we actually care about down here. Right here, we have task 7. So create a side effect. So we want to do a use effect hook that runs. Oh, look, this just is going. One file changed. It just happened. So you should be able to pull it now. All right, so the last piece right here, step 7, we're gonna set this up. So we're gonna do something very similar to what we did in app.js right here with this. Okay, so we need to create a side effect that runs when a particular variable changes. Whenever props.friend ID updates, we should trigger a fetch for details of that friend. The URL should end up looking like this. HTTP:// localhost 4000 friends 1 API key. On success, shove the details of the friend in the details slice of state. All right, so let's do task 7 right under here. So how do we create a side effect and hit an Axios endpoint or do a .get? So I'm going to go like this, and I'm going to set this next to here. So you can kind of see what this one looks like and what we want to do. We want it to look very similar to line 26 through 35, similar. Right, so on line 45, let's start this. Let's do task 7. I'm going to do a thread. Task 7. Thread. Task. Wow, if I could type. I need to find a better way to put this microphone because like I can't see my keyboard and my trackpad. It's like right here in front. I need to figure out and then I can't like, I'm always like dipping around trying to figure it out. Anyways. Okay, so task 7. So in task 5, there's only the one event listener. So I just created the function right here. So to add the event listener, what you can do is you can do the click and then you can do a function inside of here. Instead of writing the function inside of here, I just set it to a variable and then passed it in. That's what we did on line 5. And then so we just added what the event listener we're looking for, which is click, and then the callback function. This could have been rewritten like this. Oops, wrong one. So lines 20 through 23 is the same as lines 24 through 26. All I did was I just set it to a callback function. That way, then I could remove it down here. So I could remove that same function. Okay, so anybody try and test 7? Nope. Let's start working through this together. So first thing we need to do is we need to set up our use. Oh, sweet. I see some people dropping. Cool. So let's use a combination of both of those. So what the first thing we want to do is set up our use effect. So I'm going to type it out so we can see it. So we're going to invoke our use effect method, or pass in our callback function, right? We're just building out our building blocks and then our dependencies array. Perfect. Okay, the next thing we need to do is inside of our block, we need to do our Axios.get, and then our .then and our .catch. So we set that up. Okay, perfect. So now let's keep going. Our error, our catch has an error. So let's just log out the error for now. Inside of here, same thing. It's a callback function that gets a response. So let's pass that res in there. So now here I've done it again, where I have parentheses around that. You don't necessarily need parentheses around it. It works either way. If parentheses helps you read that it's a function, then put them on there. Oh, why did that do that? So then let's just log out our response for now so we can see what that is. Now let's do our .get. We need to build out something similar to this, right? So we have our base URL and our API key, and we've done it over here, right? So let's just copy this line right here and drop it in. So we drop in that. Now what we need to do is we need to update this because we need to add this ID So if we do friends/1, we save this. Now, if we come over here, we click on here, we see we have details, right? Nothing changed, but now we see down here in our console, we can see some stuff. So inside of our console, we have our data. We have our full object, our response object, and then we have our data. So we want that data. So we want to just double check. We could do res.data, save it. When we click on one of these, we're getting Christopher. See that every time we click on this, we're getting Christopher, right? Because we're doing one, we're hard coded one. So now let's update our data like it says to do. Let's shove the details, a friend in the details. So if we come, I'm going to close this down now that we don't need it. Maybe. There we go. We're going to come up here and we're going to use this set details, right? This is just our state hook, nothing crazy. I've done this before. So we're going to do set details with our res.data. Save this, come over here. Christopher, look at that. We get Christopher stuff. We close this, we go down here to Sophia and we get Christopher stuff. The reason we're getting Christopher stuff is because we're hard coded the 1. So we need this to change every time, right? And we know that this comes in every time as a prop, that friend ID, so we can just use that. So if we change this to friend ID, save it, come back over here, you see Christopher ID of 1, perfect. Close it, come up here, Sophia 25 3, cool. So things change, works. Now watch this. If we click on this one and we see our details component down here, if we click on, say, Joe, we see this changed, but nothing else changed. If we click around, we see the IDs changing, but all of the data inside of here is not changing. This is where our dependency array comes into handy. So the reason that number up here is changing is because it's a prop being passed in, right? It's being passed in via the props, and then we're rendering that out. But the details, that's all based on this use effect. That's a side effect that comes in. So we need to hit this every time. But this use effect is only being ran once because we told it to with that empty array, that empty dependencies array. We're saying, hey, only render this once. So to use this dependencies array, what it does is it allows us to pass something in that we want React to keep track of. So we know that this data changes, this friend ID changes every time that we click on one of those other C details. And so every time that this changes, we want to fire this use effect again. When we want to fire it off with the new ID. So what we do is we drop in our ID or our piece of dynamic data that's changing, whatever we want React to watch, into our dependencies array. Now we come back over here. If we click on Christopher, we see, okay, friend ID of 1, that worked. And if we click on the next one, it refires our use effect and it shows our new data. All right, and that's use effect. So let's drop some questions. I hope it's clear as mud what you're doing. Does anybody need the code? Should I drop the code one last time? Where is my, oh, it moved over to here. Hold on. You know that little like weird bar when you're screen sharing, like gets in the way of everything? Okay, there we go. There's the chat. And there's the code. Make sure you get that sent in. Let's just recap then. No questions. We'll just recap and then we'll call it. So if we come back over here to our app JS, let me make this bigger. We can see kind of what's going on. So what we've done today is we've learned about the use effect. This is the main part of what we're learning today. Anytime we're doing side effects in React, we have to use the use effect hook. Now, what this does is it's a hook. Just what in the world is that? Must have auto completed when I was typing stuff. All right, so we have the use effect. So in order to set this up, we need to do the use effect, invoke it, and then inside of here, we do our callback function. This is just good habit to get into and set it up with our empty dependencies array. This way it only runs on the first render. So then our use effect, what we do is we do anything we want to do some side effects, especially API calls. So when we use React, we have, anytime we're doing API calls, we have to use a use effect. In this case, we're using Axios to do that. We could use fetch or some other promise-based library or something like that. In our case, we've been using Axios. Set that Axios up call. We know how to do that. It's just a dot then and a dot catch, and we set those up. All right. So then what we need to do is we looked at this conditional rendering. So this conditional rendering does it and ampersand. So if anything to the left of this is truthy, then we render what's at the right of it. Recap from yesterday, when we map over something or we map over an array and we're spitting out new components or new items for React, new HTML elements, we have to do a key. That's a recap from yesterday. Now inside of the details, we're doing another use effect, right? We're doing another call based on the ID. And in this case, we want to keep track of that ID. Every time that ID changes, we want this to fire off again. So that way we can get the correct data every time. So that dependencies array is used to keep track of data that changes. All right. Thank you, everyone. I hope that wasn't super confusing. You're awesome. You're doing great. Come to office hours if you have any questions. This is a lot of stuff, but basically the prop, state, and this use effect, these are the three main components of React. And as soon as we grasp these concepts really well, I mean, you're off to the races running. So it's fantastic. Keep working on your module project. Like I said, come to office hours. Friday's sprint challenge is going to be a representation of everything this week. So make sure you get your module projects done. If you have questions, reach out. We'll get those answered. So everyone have a wonderful afternoon and we'll talk tomorrow. Thank you very much.